Welcome to the SaaS Revolution Show. I'm your host, Alex Theuma, CEO founder of SaaStock. Delighted today to be joined by Massimo Arrigoni, who is the CEO of Bee. Welcome, Massimo.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great to have you on the podcast for the first time. You've been coming to SaaStock for a few years, sponsoring SaaStock for a few years. I felt I got to know you more at SaaS Society this year, which is our kind of founder retreat post SaaStock. So that was good. Actually, looking at some of the photos this week, I'll have to share some of those with you, some good ones there. But we definitely had a great time in Castle Leslie in Ireland as well. But great to have you on the podcast. You're looking very tanned, Massimo. Are you, why are you so tanned? Tell me. I'm looking pale in comparison.
That's funny. Yeah. Well, I'm lucky to live in California. I live on the coast in Santa Cruz, just south of San Francisco, about an hour and a half south. And I like working out at lunchtime. And so I'll go for a run. So it's awesome to go on a run on the beach. And so I think that's what does it.
Very cool. Very
but
cool.
I love Dublin. SaaStock is it's one of my favorite shows of the year. I always tell everybody that it's a great time. It's a great city. So even if you can't go running at lunch on the beach, maybe some people do in Dublin too.
Yeah,
but, great place.
You can do. I mean, there was so many side events at SaaStock this year. I think it was like North Zone, they were doing paddle boarding down the River Liffey, which was a kind of new one with a bunch of entrepreneurs. So I was like, where's Hanno from Personio? And it's like, oh, like we're all going. And or even from Whereby, they were like paddle boarding down the River Liffey when they should have been at the conference, but it was just kind of, part of the experience. So we don't like, a lot of people go running in the mountains, outside of Dublin and the beaches. And I've done none of those things. I haven't even been to the beach in Dublin. I haven't been to the mountains. And I definitely haven't paddleboarded down the river. I mean, come on. Like, I'm too busy running the bloody conference. But maybe next year, or we can combine all three in the next year's SaaS Society or something like that. But anyway, Massimo, so we know you're in Santa Cruz, and that's about as much as we know. We know you like exercising as well at lunchtime and have a great tan. But, who is Massimo Arrigoni?
So I grew up in Italy, was born in Milan, great city. Have you been, Alex? Have you spent time in Milan at all?
I haven't. I've done Rome, Napoli, and
See,
I've been to Capri. I've been down south, Puglia, all down south.
So often people that go to Italy tend to skip Milan, or maybe they fly in. But they spend at least a couple of days. It's a great city, and it's improved a ton over the last 20 years or so. So I grew up there, and then during college, during my third year, I ended up studying at UCLA in Los Angeles, which was fantastic. It was 1995. I'm a big basketball fan, and the team won the NCAA championship that year, so that was a lot of fun. And I also ended up meeting my wife at UCLA, and so that dramatically changed the trajectory for me. So I did go back to Italy to graduate there, and but then I moved to the States, and that's how I ended up in the States. And also being at UCLA in 95 was interesting also because things were starting to happen with the internet. And so I remember that there was some buzz, and that's also something that affected my career for sure. I then got into e-commerce, and that was one of the reasons. And here I am, 27 years later, still married, and we have 4 kids. We do a lot of happy hours with good wine and cheese. That's probably one of the reasons why we're still, going strong after all these years.
Very cool. And why Santa Cruz? Specifically, obviously, US is a big place. I know you were UCLA, but that's not quite, I guess, it's California, but yeah, why Santa Cruz?
Yeah, so my wife grew up in the Bay Area. She was born in Santa Clara when Silicon Valley was, not the Silicon Valley that we see today. and then moved to Santa Cruz and went to high school there. In fact, two of our kids are going to the same high school that she went to, so full circle there, which is really cool.
Very cool.
And so that's why we ended up moving there a few years ago, and it's great place.
I associate Santa Cruz. I've never been, but with surfing and skateboarding, is that true? And do you do either?
I suck at both. So no, I did not grow up skateboarding or surfing. And I tried skateboarding. I'm not even going to try because I'm gonna kill myself. But surfing, I tried with my son. I have a 17-year-old son. He's good. I'm not, and I don't think I have the time and the will to put into it. It's difficult, man. It's not easy. Yeah. So I don't know.
I don't
know if I could do it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'm maybe we should say we're never too old, obviously, to motivate the listeners. But I think with surfing, I feel a little bit like too old, and I feel like as I get older, I'm definitely more averse to anything that's kind of like has a little bit of danger. And I feel like, if I go surfing, I could get smacked into the rocks, or I find like sort of like excuses which make me think, well, I'm probably just safer on land. And skateboarding, I actually used to be really into skateboarding as a kid. And then I just remember one day as a kid, I was racing a car down the street, and I came off the skateboard and my face hit the pavement, and I pretty much scraped like all the skin off my face and had to go to hospital. Luckily, I mean, it's probably why I look like this, but anyway, that was kind of like one moment where I was like, also like skateboarding can really hurt sometimes. And I don't know, I'm just a bit averse to danger and wouldn't do like bungee jumping or skydiving or anything like that now. Just kind of keep anything that's a risk of life or injury, keep me away from that.
Yeah, I still take some risks because I love skiing. Growing up in northern Italy, I spent a lot of time in the Alps, and that was really special. And so I still love skiing. So I try to go, although from the coast where I live, going to the Lake Tahoe area in California takes several hours. But still, so I still do that. Love it. Try to take my kids when they want to come. So still risky stuff there, but But I feel like I've done it for so long that it's manageable risk.
Yeah. Like a second nature sort of thing, I guess, kind of now.
Yeah.
And so you're CEO of B, and that's like B, like Buzzy Bee, but B, sort of, EE. What is B? Tell us about it, and how did you end up as CEO of B?
Yeah, so B plays in the no-code visual building tool space. So it's a visual builder to create emails, landing pages, other digital assets. In fact, the name stands for Best Email Editor. That was the internal project name when we first started, and then we stuck with it. So,
makes sense. I didn't think about it.
Yeah, there you go. So it's a great space. There's a lot of content creation going on all the time, and so. We have tons of people that use the tool. So you can use it either online at bfree.io. You just go there and click Start Designing, start doing that. And then a lot of people probably don't even know that they're using it because we have an embeddable version of it, and a ton of companies have embedded our visual builder into their software. So in MarTech, great tools like Iterable, Customer.io, Bloomreach, Freshworks, many others, but also companies that are not necessarily seen as necessarily a marketing platform. So Network for Good for fundraising, or Herefish or Sense for recruiting, and almost any space where you can think of, okay, that tool, there's some content creation in there. We have hundreds and hundreds of those applications. And so if you put the two together, there's millions of people that have used our tool to create, to design emails, landing pages, etc. So super exciting. And you asked how I ended up there. So B started as a project within a larger company, an email service provider based in Italy called MailUp, still going strong. And we were just redoing the internal drag and drop builder for email. And then at some point we decided, hey, this looks pretty good. Let's just throw it up on the web and see if anybody likes it. So it was really an MVP where we just put up this visual builder that was readily available. and people liked the idea. And so gradually it became an independent thing. And then the thing became an actual business unit within this larger group. And that's where I kind of said, okay, this is getting big enough where it needs a CEO full time. And so I stepped on that.
Very cool. And what, give us a picture of then the timeline then from this becoming like a tool within MailUp to becoming its own individual thing, you know, you being the CEO, like what did that look like? You know, is this sort of 1, 2, 3, 4 years?
Yeah, a little longer. So this was really bootstrapped within a larger organization. So the larger organization is now called Growens, and it's a publicly traded company in Italy with several business units. This is one of them. But so when we started this, there was no big check. It was just an internal project. So definitely much closer to a bootstrapped company. And we started in the fall of 2014. The first dollar of revenue came in the fall of 2015. And now we're, fall of 22. So from the first MVP, almost 8 years. From the first sale, let's say around 7 years. And we just passed 10 million in recurring revenue in August, and still growing strong. So you can see the trajectory. It's a good growth trajectory, but not not some explosion at some point where we put in 20 million in VC type of thing.
Yeah. Well, no, congrats, 10 million. Like, it's a very difficult thing to do. Yeah, and obviously it feels great when you get there. I mean, it seems like for our SaaStock founder membership, there's a particular slide when we're talking to founders about joining, and we use these statistics from Vern Harnish, who wrote Scaling Up, and he talks about for B2B businesses to get to 1 million in revenue, like only 4% of B2B businesses get to 1 million in revenue, right? So the majority, the die, or they just don't quite make it to 1 million, but only 0.4% then kick on to 10 million in revenue, right? So B is part of the 0.4%, just to show how bloody difficult it is to not only start a business, scale a business, but to get to 10 million in revenue. 0.4% of all businesses that are created get there, according to Vern. And I'm sure these statistics are pretty
not
accurate.
easy.
Yeah, not easy. So you're at 10 million in revenue. What other data can you share about the business? Head count. I don't know, some other sort of like KPIs, metrics, etc. We know you're bootstrapped, also kind of backed by Growens.
Yeah. So, bootstrapped, and Growens kind of provided sort of a line of credit at the beginning to help, but not a large amount. But that's also why you could think of it as a kind of initial quick round of financing. So we're about 70 people now, around 30 in the US and the rest in Europe, mostly in Italy. That's because that's where we started originally. And the two sides of the business, so again, there's the hosted design suite that you access at befree.io, and then the embeddable visual builder. Still, after all these years, kind of split down the middle. It wasn't designed that way, and we weren't expecting it to continue that way. But the revenue is still kind of split down the middle, both growing. And I did a presentation, by the way, at SaaStock on a switch that we did earlier this year from free trials to full freemium on our design suite, and shared a bunch of data there. I know you guys are going to put out the video soon, so if people are interested, there's a lot more data there. We now do almost 16,000 signups a month for the design suite online. Very much a product-led growth strategy there. So. Tons of additional kind of insights in that talk that I gave at SaaStock.
Very cool. Yeah. I believe it's certainly out this week, and it should go initially out on SaaStock TV. Certainly by the time I think this podcast is published, people will be able to search for that talk on SaaStock TV, and heard a lot of good feedback. I saw speakers asking for the slides for your talk, and I don't know why in my head that's always a good. I don't know, kind of like benchmark of like this was good. The speakers are asking for another speaker's talk. So congrats on that. I look forward to watching it. Obviously, when I'm at the conference, I only ever see like 1 or 2 minutes of certain talks, and it's very difficult to judge because I'm being pulled from pillar to post. So I saw very few pieces of content, and I always aspire post-event to, grab the popcorn and sit down and, watch a bunch of the content. But generally, it just kind of happens that over the years, I end up, watching select pieces, on SaaS.tv or YouTube channel as well. And I know we're going to really kind of like dive deep into the topic that I think also you spoke or to me a little bit about SaaS Society, the idea about running retreats for remote companies. But so I'm excited to dive into that. But before that, what are like a couple of lessons you can share, from scaling B to date? So I'll be kind of curious to know.
Sure, and you said how difficult it is to get to the 10 million mark. There's always a component of luck, and in our case, being a remote company, we lucked into, on one side, being close to the initial adopters of the product, and at the same time, especially when you're selling software to other software companies. So let me backtrack for a second. The first product that we put out was our embeddable builder. And so that's sold to other software companies, right? So a lot of those companies are in the San Francisco area, of course, for obvious reasons. And so me being here was very helpful. I literally, sat down with some startups back then. They were startups. So, for example, Iterable comes to mind. Sitting down with the founders because they were just starting out. So that was extremely helpful to kind of test the MVP and get feedback. But then at the same time, we were able to hire people not necessarily in the Bay Area, which would have been extremely hard and expensive. So lesson there, like being able to, at the same time, being where the customers are and not having to hire there if it ends up being a very expensive place to be, that helped a lot. In fact, looking back, had we not been able to do that, I don't know if we would have gotten where we are today. So that was a lesson. And then the other thing that I would say, over time, we have been able to increase prices. And when you review prices, and if you have been building into the product new functionality, value, that you've been adding value to the product, you communicate well enough, you tell customers in advance, you should be able to raise prices in a reasonable manner without grandfathering. So whenever we did price increases, we never grandfathered. And the pushback was always very small. Of course, you've got some people that are, not happy about it. But especially if you're real about what you're doing, you're reasonable, you're fair. So that's another lesson. Like over time, we would do these bump in MRR, 15-20% bump thanks to a repricing. So that's something to keep in mind. I know, the Profit Well, Patrick always talks about it, for example. So yeah, very useful.
How often would you do price increases, as an example?
Every 2-3 years per product line. So we have 2 product lines, as I was saying earlier. And so because it's 2 product lines, it ends up being a price review or increase every year and a half. But on the individual product line, it's actually every 2-3 years.
Cool. And you said like generally 15-20% sort of bump. Was that correct?
That's overall. That's the bump that it creates in the MRR.
Right.
The increase in price varies quite a bit depending on the plan that you're talking about. So in some cases, we would terminate a plan, and so people may see a bigger bump than what you said, especially from smaller plans. But on average, yes.
Cool, gotcha. And so as you said, you're a remote business, 70 team members, sort of globally. Quite a few of them in Italy, but still a remote business. And for the last 5 years, you've been getting the remote team together and running retreats in order for the people to get together and get connected, know the colleagues, and help around the sort of the culture of the business. And I think like now I don't know if it's more than ever, we're in a remote stroke hybrid stroke. Some companies are going, full time back into the office, maybe not so much in SaaS, but certainly in, some other industries. But it's probably super interesting, I think, sort of right now to get some learnings about, running retreats and the importance of those and the upsides and the pitfalls of those. And I know that you've got this knowledge to kind of share. So I want to kind of get into that a little bit. So B kind of started remote. When was the first retreat? What did that look like? Paint us a picture of this first retreat, and then we can get like versus the last retreat. What did that look like?
Yeah, so when you're small, obviously it's a lot easier, but we started early. I think the first one was 2018, so probably 3 years into it. Before we would just, we were such a small team that we would just get together without even being a retreat, really. But so we started early, investing time and effort and money into getting people together. And the first retreat was at a vineyard in Piemonte, so northern Italy on the kind of the west side. Great place, and spent I think 3 days there. The last retreat, so it was in October in Sicily and near Taormina. So great place, and that was at a resort. And we can talk about pros and cons of being in a place like that. And at this point, there is a person on the team that's dedicated to organizing events. So that's, by the way, one thing that I would encourage people to do, especially if they are running events, not just obviously to get people together, but trade shows, etc. We invested early on that. So we were only about 30 people on the team or so. And we hired a person to help us with events in general. And she spent a lot of time on organizing retreats, not just the overall team retreat, the company retreat, but also individual retreats for the various departments. So we try when we can to allocate money to managers so that they can get their small team together at least once a year. So then you have teams that get together twice. So one is the company retreat, if we can, and then team retreats, for marketing, dev, etc. So we invested early on a person dedicated to that, and of course at the beginning she was wearing also a lot of other hats, helping out, on other things. Whereas now she's mostly just doing events, and so that's definitely something to look at, to invest early into that because it takes time and effort.
With the first retreat, how did you decide like how much you were going to spend on it? Was it like you say, okay, we've got this many employees or 30 or whatever the number was, and like, let's find it and find out what the costs are going to be, and that's that? Or was there like a bit of science behind it? And compared to sort of like now, like, are you spending, okay, like a certain amount of revenue per year, on company retreats? And so how does it work from then compared to kind of now? Like what is the pricing, sort of like structure of that sort of look like?
So there was no thought really put into it at the beginning. We just did it. Now it's a much bigger dollar amount. And so last year, between everything, I think we spent around $3,000 per person on getting people together, again, not just one time for the company retreat, but for department retreats as well. And next year, 2023, we're going to try to spend a little bit less because it is a year where everybody's kind of watching expenses. So we're going to try to go down to around 2K per person. Try to be a little bit more conservative on that side. And one of the ways to do that is we're probably going to combine the company retreat with the team department get together. So attaching basically the two so that you reduce the travel expenses quite a bit. So that's one technique that we're going to use next year. But honestly, there's pros and cons, right? If you are able financially to do two separate events, even better, because then people can get together. And then the other thing that we do is bring more people than needed to events like SaaStock, because typically the additional cost of having 2-3 extra people there is not huge. and they just get so much out of it. So that, for example, is very helpful with new employees, because otherwise you might have a new employee that doesn't get to meet anybody in person for many, many months, right? If you're far away from your next company retreat. So bringing people to a trade show helps with that. So so we've been doing that. But budget-wise, now that it's a bigger amount, there's definitely much more planning, and also more. You need to justify to yourself, to your team, if you have investors, and so being very clear around the why you're doing this is super important. And I always say we don't do retreats because we're doing well. I strongly believe we're doing well because we do retreats. Right? It's the other way around. So getting people together is not a time for necessarily for celebration. Yeah, you might have some of that, but really the reason why you're doing it is completely different. And we can get into the details if you want. And
No, definitely. That's an interesting way to look at things, because I mean, like with us, like we had, I think in Q3 we had a record quarter, and they were like, what are we going to do as a prize? And so we decided that we'll do a little retreat to a place called OC Island. And that was like for us like a celebration and then an opportunity to bring the team together. But I think I like the way that you're sort of thinking about it. We don't, why necessarily wait for, a celebratory occasion, of which we hope there will be many and opportunities throughout the year, to say, let's all get together, as a business and have such a retreat. So it's definitely something to take away from that.
If you see it as a celebration, it's easy to cut it out of the budget when things get harder, right? Because it's like a nice dinner. Well, we don't really need to have the nice dinner. We can just say thank you to each other. If you see it as a fundamental piece of running a successful company, then if it's really foundational, you can't remove it, because then you're risking to the foundation of what you've built. So I very much believe that it is foundational, because companies are complicated, because we are complicated. We're complicated people, and running a successful business, as you know, is about the nuances, right? The details, the relationships, and how those relationships play into the bigger picture. And so I believe that getting people together in the right way is foundational to create the right kind of relationships. And I asked my team, by the way, before we did this, because I wanted to hear their voice on why they believe that this is important. So I can read you some of the things that they said, because the words that they use are kind of interesting. So, for example, they said it improves morale, increases creativity, creates strong bonds, creates a feeling of community, breaks down barriers. One colleague, Tori, used something that I love. She says, it allows me to see my colleagues in high definition. I thought that was fantastic. And it really gives you that idea of, right, like we're complicated human beings. And when you devote time and effort to getting people together for a significant amount of time, and you try to do it right so that they really get to know each other, they get to that higher definition, right, level of understanding of each other, so that then when somebody posts something on Slack that sounds like a jerk, you have that buffer to say, well, wait a second, that she or he's not a jerk. There's probably more to this, right? Yep. Let's just calm down and see what's going on. So, yeah.
No, great to hear that. And I think similarly, like after our retreat, there was such a buzz and that kind of boost in morale, motivation, and then like we run these kind of start, stop, keep with our team members, where we ask them what should we start doing, stop, keep doing, and keep doing. And perhaps no surprises, post-retreat, everybody was like, we need to be doing more retreats, right? And they were so good, and had a great time. So that's good to see. What are some of the things that worked sort of well? What are the things that not worked? Some of the mistakes to avoid.
So let's start maybe from that. Mistakes, packing the agenda with too much stuff It's probably it tends to be the biggest mistake, and one of the things that we've changed over time. You have this desire to discuss so many things because you're getting together maybe 3 days, 4 days, something like that, right? And so you want to like get the most out of it, and so that you might pack the agenda with too many things. Whereas again, since we said that the foundation is to develop these relationships, break down the silos, etc., then it's actually good to leave just empty space and just let people decide to have small conversations, go for a walk, whatever it is. So over time, we've reduced the number of things that we put in the agenda and increased the number of just hours that are empty. And so you decide whether you want to play soccer, or whatever. Which also brings me to the idea of like, should you do this in a city or more like a resort type of place? So it's not necessarily a mistake, it's a choice. There's pros and cons, but in our experience, being in a place that allows for more options without leaving. So if you're in a city, you leave the facility where you're at, and immediately you have transportation challenges, potentially, people getting lost, whatever, especially if they don't speak the language. If you are in a resort type of place, resort sounds fancy, and then you feel like, okay, you're wasting money. No, it's just like, let's just say a place that allows for options. It creates that ability to pick, right? People can pick what they want to do. It could be they're playing tennis or whatever, and that we found that to be helpful. So transportation is always challenging. So we've had some challenges there. So one of the things that we've done recently, for example, creating a buddy system, so that you don't forget people. So last year, for example, we were in Naples, Italy, and we left. We had 2 buses. We left and we forgot somebody, so that's not great. So we things like that to make sure that you have systems in place.
What are your thoughts? I mean, that's quite funny, and I mean, you're like, this is not quite the same. On SaaS Society, when we were traveling to Castle Leslie, like somebody actually joined on the bus for the 2-hour drive, who wasn't actually supposed to be there, just kind of got on the wrong bus and realized when we got there that he wasn't supposed to be there. So the opposite of leaving somebody behind to bringing somebody that wasn't actually supposed to come. But I saw one company, I mean, I would say like Chili Piper recently had a big retreat where they brought their whole team, I think, to Morocco or something like that. And there was a photo, and everybody, like, they was on this one jumbo jet, like 200 Chili Pipers or whatever. And my first thoughts are, what if that plane went down? The company would kind of go down. So what are your thoughts? And obviously it's a negative thought, but like about sort of the risk of something like that. What are your thoughts? And so as you bring people, I mean, I guess it's a remote company, but they're remote as well. Like in getting everybody to go to a location, do you think about risk and disaster recovery and not everybody or the exec team being on the same plane and this sort of thing? How do you think about that? Or is that not something to be worried about?
It's not something that we've been deliberate about, but we weren't all on the same plane. Maybe the thought would have crossed my mind had we been on the same airplane. So, but definitely planning, right? So, especially when you are traveling internationally, and some people, for some people, especially when you have young members of the team, it might be the first time that they travel that far, right? And so, it requires some planning. So we start planning the next company retreat 5-6 months in advance at least. In fact, we're planning now for the next one. And that also has obviously impact on cost. So, but it all goes back to being deliberate about the fact that you're investing in something meaningful. And therefore you're going to invest time, money, human resources, which also brings up about something that like on the cons column, right? This is time. Like there's it's not just the cost of the get together itself, but imagine all the hours that you're spending, organizing this. So definitely it creates these hidden costs that you need to be aware of. And that also increases the perception of, okay, this is really an investment, so let's make the most out of it. And let's do it if we believe that it is a foundational investment.
And are there certain rules around like behavior and drinking and so on? I mean, you probably have you watched? I don't know if you watched We Crashed, about the WeWork sort of retreats and the big parties that went on there and all the tequila that was drunk and everything else that kind of happened. What are your thoughts around that? Because often sort of retreats, can be places where a lot of alcohol can be consumed and so on. So yeah, just interested in your thoughts around that.
Expectations are huge. So just setting the expectations, like, yeah, of course, let's have a drink. It's great, especially at the beginning. You're breaking the ice. Some people have never met each other in person, and not everybody is outgoing. So that's great. But setting the expectations of, hey, guys, we are here. This is an important investment. We're investing into building better products, serving our customers better, building a better company. Running this thing in a way that's going to be better tomorrow than it was yesterday. And we are investing, all of us. And so setting those expectations helps. And then practically speaking, there are things like that you can do, for example, just wine instead of an open bar, right? Like, so you can make some adjustments so that you reduce the chances that somebody that didn't even mean to mix drinks and just get completely wasted. You help prevent those situations from happening. And then if something happens, you get right on it. Typically, somebody didn't even mean to drink too much, so it has happened. You don't make it a big deal. You just have a talk with that person and say, okay, let's reset here. This is why we're here. And so far, we've never had a major issue. There have been some instances, but they were in the end handled that way.
Cool. But moving on to the quickish fire round now, Massimo. What one thing has moved the needle the most for your career?
I think it's being positive. When I think about what people tell me that has been important to them, I try to bring positivity to what I do, and that typically is recognized in a good way, which also means we want to create a positive impact on the people around us, the people that work with us, on our customers. So being positive is not just the glass is half full, but let's make sure that we put out quality things and we create a quality environment, because that brings positive outcomes. So I would say that.
What's the best advice you've ever received?
So that's a difficult one. I don't have one piece of advice that's been just particularly impactful, but just the constructive criticism, right, which kind of hurts. But if I had to say, that's the thing that's helped me the most, whether it's my kids that tell me, hey, Dad, you're not listening. Like when your kid tells you something like that, right, it stops you in your tracks. Colleagues, my wife, friends, like that constructive criticism that comes from somebody that you really care about and you trust, that I think is what has helped me the most.
I get sometimes like, Dad, why are you always on your phone? And I'm like, oh yeah, okay. I probably need to be, getting away from the device and being a bit more present. What about the biggest failure you've made and lesson learned?
Yeah, many, but one more than a failure, a big missed opportunity was the first company that I co-founded in the 2000s. Was an e-commerce company. It was a shopping cart system for small businesses, and it was a good product, but we missed the switch to SaaS at some point. And non-SaaS software, if you remember, there was a lot more friction in it, right? You would install things and configure things. And with e-commerce, it was particularly difficult to get things set up. And so when things like Shopify came around and made it so much easier to start a store, that was really a big change in the space. And for a variety of reasons, we kind of missed that train, and so it could have been a much bigger opportunity. So lesson learned there, massive lesson learned that I bring with me now constantly is looking at friction. Where is friction, especially in the customer experience, but also internally in the company? Where is friction and how can we remove it? Knowing that typically when you remove friction, there's good outcomes. So,
what about the hardest thing about being a CEO?
For me, again, I'm outgoing. I like to say things and voice my opinion, and sometimes I don't realize that it carries a weight that's heavier than I thought, right? So people will say, well, you said that. I'm like, no, I didn't mean it. It wasn't even a real thought, right? It was something that just came to my mind and I said it. And it carried a weight that was much greater than what was intended to carry. So that's I need to catch myself sometimes to just shut up. Just don't say something unless you've really thought about it.
Well, what about your daily routine? What does that look like?
So as we were saying at the beginning, being on the west coast of the U.S. and a lot of people in Europe, I try to get up early and start working around 7 a.m. So a lot of coffee with those meetings in the morning, and then when I can, I try to work out at lunchtime. I like that, like the light outside, etc. So recently I've gotten back into tennis a little bit, which is fun, and then the afternoon is more like non-meeting space. So I try to leave empty space there to do that kind of work, and then in the evening, hanging out with friends, with my wife, the kids, etc. So I typically stop around 6 or so.
How many hours a night's sleep do you get?
I try 7, although I'm not always successful. Not one of the things that I'm best at. I'm working on it, but I try to do around from 11 to 6 or 11:30 to 6:30, something like that.
Cool. As we know, I mean, we've got a market downturn, a recession. There are a lot of cuts happening. There are headwinds facing SaaS. So, what's your advice to those that are listening about getting through these headwinds?
Again, we didn't do a big round of financing, so I'm not gonna touch on that. There's a lot of advice out there in terms of extending your runway, etc. But for me specifically, I can tell you what I'm doing is going back to the core, like spending more time on listening to the voice of the customer. So in my case, it might be listening to calls that were recorded by the sales team or other things. So I think it's one of those times where you need to go back to the very core of why the product exists and just build on top of that. And yes, watch expenses, etc. But going back to the core, I think refocuses everybody on what matters the most. And so you also make those decisions, I think, more closer to the very reasons why you're selling something. And I think that will end up, allowing us to weather the storm and come out stronger when the headwinds go away.
Very cool. Great advice there, Massimo. And so where can people find you online if they want to reach out and connect to you?
So these days I try to be more active on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is a good space. So if you look for my name on LinkedIn, I think you'll find it pretty quickly. And I try to post some stuff there. So you'll also find some articles on some of the things that we talked about today. So
great stuff.
I'd love for people to react to that.
And like we said at the beginning, I think by the time that the podcast is published, Massimo's talk from SaaStock about moving to freemium will be on SaaStock.tv. So do check that out, and then soon to be on YouTube. But Massimo Arrigoni, CEO of B, thanks so much for being on the SaaS Revolution Show today. Great seeing you again. Looking forward to seeing you next year, either at SaaStock USA or back in Dublin. And thanks so much, Massimo Arrigoni.
For sure, Alex. Great talking to you, and I will absolutely be there next year.